Hello Patreon supporters, thank you very much for donating and helping me moving this project forward. I wish you welcome to the Patreon edition of the monthly Einzelgänger Q&A of September 2019. In this edition I will answer questions about individuation, stoicism, nirvana and aversion towards certain people. Now let's start with the first question, which I got from MacLeod Rogers, who is a supporter on Patreon. I quote, "What information is available from early Stoic philosophers?" Thank you for your question. Before I answer this, I'll first mention the Stoic periods. Not too long ago I read a book named The Cambridge Companion to the Stoics, which contains basically a source of academic information from several scholars that are experts in their fields. This book recognizes 3 time periods: the early Stoics, the middle Stoics and the late Stoics, also known as the Roman Stoics. I mostly talk about the Roman Stoics, among them are Seneca, Epictetus and Marcus Aurelius, because their work is abundant and accessible. Among the early Stoics are Chrysippus, also regarded as the greatest Stoic of all time, Cleanthes, and of course Zeno of Citium, who is the founder of Stoicism. Most works of the early Stoics did not survive, and all that is left are fragments. You can find these fragments online, but they are just a fraction of what has been written. It is said that Chrysippus wrote more than 700 books, and none of them survived. Now, what has survived is what later authors wrote about the early Stoics and the quotes they adopted in their works. The works of Cicero, a statesman who did not regard himself a Stoic by the way, contain quotes by Chrysippus. Cicero's work is considered one of the best sources of early Stoicism, and like I said before, you can find the remaining fragments of the early Stoics online. Next question is from Essay, below the video about Carl Jung and the individuation process. I quote, "So, solutions please. What are the best processes for integration?" Thank you for your question. Yes, I really didn't go into specific ways or techniques to integrate the unconscious. Jung mentioned active imagination as the technique to make sense of the unconscious, and also dream analysis. Active imagination is basically a form of meditation in which we focus on the language of the unconscious. It happens to be that the unconscious mind communicates in a different language, based on images, archetypal figures, metaphors, etc. The meditative element of active imagination is that the practitioner should observe the products of the imagination, or dreams for that matter, without intervention. Here's how Jung describes the process. The patient must make himself as conscious as possible of the mood he is in, sinking himself in it without reserve and noting down on paper all the fantasies and other associations that come up. Fantasy must be allowed the freest possible play, yet not in such a manner that it leaves the orbit of its object, namely the affect, by setting off a kind of chain reaction association process." End quote. So instead of filling up the imagination, the practitioner should simply watch how it unfolds naturally. This way, the unconscious can speak for itself, and we can even go into a dialogue with it. So this is quite similar to Buddhist breathing meditation, in which the practitioner watches the thoughts, but without dialogue. The same thing can be done with dreams. Most people aren't aware that they are dreaming until they wake up, although there is the possibility of lucid dreaming. Dreams are manifestations of the unconscious, according to Jung. It is the unconscious trying to tell us something. Nightmares in particular, something I've been dealing with personally on a regular basis, are manifestations of the shadow. Since I've become a bit more familiar with Jung's work, I pay way more attention to dreams, especially when I have a nightmare. I really take some time to analyze it, seeing if I can make sense of the symbolic language of the unconscious. Now, someone named Lawrence Beck posted an answer to this question in the comment section, which I would like to share. Start with shadow work. The most easily identifiable shadows will be the ones you can dive into from observing your projections. Look at your negative projections. The nastier, the better, because then you can start to find greater relief when you integrate them back into your personality. Part of the idea is to understand that you make a subjective experience instead of accepting the objective facts. When you find something that disturbs your ego, remember the last time you were that way. then you can realize that you're actually that way too inside. This doesn't mean it's reflected in your actions though. An idea of shadow work and finding individuation is to be able to realize you are pretty much a horrible monster as the next person. The difference is what action you choose to embark through thought, words and deed. This way you can start acting more true to your authentic self instead of blaming or judging others, which is usually conditioned from a society and parents and peer groups." End quote. I've got another question from the comment section below my latest video about Jung by Sheikh Mayadi. Here it goes. "Can someone give me an example about the repression of the anima?" Thank you for your question. I can do that. So the anima is the female within the male, or characteristics within the male that are classically considered feminine. Repression of the anima can happen in many different ways. I think it's very prominent to see this in macho cultures or cultures in which it isn't appropriate for males to show their feminine sides, and doing so basically lowers them in the public eye. Perhaps a man is inclined to be caring or likes to engage in more feminine hobbies like fashion, beauty, and certain forms of spirituality. But out of shame, he repressed this feature of himself, so it becomes part of the shadow. I think that the repressed homosexuality of Colonel Fitz in the movie American Beauty can also be seen as an example of a repressed anima. Even worse, since according to Jung, homosexuality is an identification with one's anima or animus. So repressing that part results in a huge shadow, which we can see manifest clearly if we look closer at the character of Fitz, who has resorted to forms of hypermasculinity, identifying himself with the military, collecting Nazi items, being a homophobe, beating his son, and being overall bitter and judgmental towards anything liberal in the world. I can only imagine that this creates a huge split in his personality, and anyone who has seen the movie knows that the consequences are devastating. Next question is by Lonely Bumper Car, below the video about introverts. I quote, "Are some nationalities more introvert?" Thanks for the question. From my own observation, I think there are differences between certain nationalities when it comes to exuberance. I think that the Nordic people are more reserved than people from the Mediterranean. Last year, a Syrian family moved next to my parents' house, and they talk and talk all the time. So I guess they are very extroverted and exuberant. I can even see different degrees in introversion and extroversion in different regions within the country I live, which is the Netherlands. The south, where I live, tend to be more to themselves and modest, while the northwest are quite loud and talkative. Personally, I prefer the south, but that's just my taste, I guess. I guess we could say that the countries where people overall don't engage in small talk often, like to be alone, get exhausted by too much people, desire social autonomy, and are perfectly comfortable with being silent, are more introverted. Next question is by Mick, and I quote, "What is nirvana according to you?" Now, that's a question. Nirvana is basically a Buddhist concept. The problem with nirvana is that we cannot really describe it with words, because it is something that transcends word and thought. I think that nirvana is what certain religions mean when they talk about heaven. Oftentimes, heaven is described as a paradise where we go after we die, depending on how we have lived on earth. Personally, I find this concept hard to grasp, because what's a paradise for one is a hell for another. Also, in the concept of heaven, the emphasis is put on external things. Thus, a beautiful, fertile place with all the good things of the world should make us eternally happy. I suspect that if you'd put a group of human beings in such a paradise, they would become bored very quickly and start to create drama of some sort, just to make it a bit more exciting. It's like creating the perfect Matrix that didn't work out, as we learned from the movie The Matrix. So I think that nirvana is certainly a mind state, or perhaps a non-state, something that goes far beyond the mind. But I couldn't give you any description that would make sense, because I'm certainly not in a place of nirvana myself. I prefer to stick with the words of the Buddha himself. Nirvana is the end of suffering. Next question is by Majority Rules. I quote, "Why is everything stoic about this channel?" Thanks for your question. Well, it's not. About 40 to 50% of my content is related to stoicism, and the rest are other topics. I've been going a bit deeper into Jungian psychology lately, and my videos about Eastern philosophy start to take off as well. I like to create content about Stoicism because I simply enjoy the philosophy, it helped in my own life, and there's also a lot of demand for videos about Stoicism here on YouTube. Next question is by Fatima, below the video about Stoicism and aversion. I quote, "What if you're averse to someone without even knowing them properly and don't want to know them, but still don't want to be aversive towards them because that takes away a lot of your energy and triggers overthinking?" Thanks for your question, Fatima. So as far as I understand, you're adverse to someone without knowing them properly. The great question is why? As illogical as this sounds, it's quite common. I've got this too in some cases. With me, I can see someone for the first time and just dislike that person immediately. I think this has two possible reasons. The first one is that this person radiates something that I feel naturally threatened by. In this case, I will not be the only one who feels threatened by such a person. His or her appearance simply puts other people on guard. The second reason is that this person reminds me of someone in the past I had a bad experience with. This could be a high school bully, for example. I think that my mind has trained itself to watch out for people with certain characteristics, even though these characteristics are kind of superficial. In your question, you say that you don't want to be aversive towards that person because it takes away a lot of your energy and triggers overthinking. Now, you're basically averse to being averse. And when you're hearing me saying this, chances are that you now become averse to being averse to being averse. I would say that it's a good idea to get rid of this loop and accept your feelings of aversion. These feelings probably come from the unconscious and you don't really have control over them. What you do control is your position towards them and the actions you take because of them. This starts with awareness. When you're aware of these thought processes, you can decide what to do next. Honestly, I think there are so many ways to handle this situation. So I'll just tell you how I would handle the situation. The first thing I would do is just acknowledging the thoughts and the feelings that come with them, realizing that these are probably products of the unconscious mind that tries to warn me for something based on its own experiences or a natural inclination. So the unconscious may try to tell me something about myself, but this doesn't mean that my feelings about this particular person are correct. I can just leave it at this, or I can decide to get to know this person a bit better, to find out if he or she is in line with my initial thoughts and feelings. In many cases, I'm just plain wrong about that person. So it's always good to test the environment to see if your fantasies about it are correct. So everyone, that was it for this month. Thank you everyone for listening, and of course, thank you for your support. Next month, I'll be a bit quicker with the inquiry for questions. I would like to close this edition with a nice quote by Jason Gray below my video about the meditative effects of cleaning. When you clean your room cleans you. Where you live, lives in you. Thank you for watching.